I can see you've got me confused with some other woman who gives a damn about making everyone else feel comfortable about my choices. Because honestly, I'm so effing tired of having to explain myself to people who wouldn't understand real ambition if it slapped them across their boring little faces. Like when I met Dustin at that Pacers game. Everyone acts like I should have been swooning over his nice guy routine. But I was actually thinking about how he kept giving me extra cheese sauce without me even asking. Most guys would have made some stupid joke about it. But he just quietly made sure I had what I needed. That's when I knew he might actually be useful. His buddy had an extra ticket and almost didn't go to the game at all, which is so typical of how random life can be. I was there with some friends, and during halftime, I'm standing at the concession stand trying to decide between nachos and a hot dog when this guy next to me starts laughing. Turns out he's watching me stare at the cheese dispenser like it's going to give me the meaning of life or something. So I played it up a little, acting all indecisive and cute. And he goes ahead and gets me the nachos with extra cheese without me even asking. Then he hands me his phone number on a napkin and says, maybe next time we can argue about snack choices somewhere with better food. I started texting him that same night because why not? And within a week, we're talking every single day. He had this way of remembering little things I mentioned, like how I hate when people chew ice or how I always get cold in movie theaters. Most guys forget that stuff immediately. But Dustin would actually bring me a jacket to the movies without me having to ask. It was refreshing to meet someone who actually paid attention for once, even if he wasn't exactly setting the world on fire career-wise. We dated for 2 whole years, and I have to admit it was pretty comfortable. His mom absolutely loved me, always telling him how lucky he was, and asking when we were going to get married. His friends thought I was good for him too, which was nice validation, I guess. He'd take me shopping sometimes, and I'd light up when he'd buy me something nice, though it was usually from Target or maybe Macy's, if I was really lucky. I couldn't help comparing what he'd spend on me versus what my friends' boyfriends would drop on them. But I figured he was doing his best with what he had. When he finally proposed after those 2 years, I genuinely cried and said yes. I hugged him like he was my whole world, because in that moment, it felt like maybe he could be. We had this beautiful wedding with his family and friends. Everyone so happy for us, making all these toasts about how perfect we were together. I remember standing there in my dress thinking this was it. This was my happily ever after. Even though there was this tiny voice in the back of my head wondering if this was really all there was going to be. The first few months of marriage were fine, I guess, but I started feeling this restlessness I couldn't shake. Dustin would come home from work, all excited to see me, wanting to talk about his day or plan some weekend trip to a state park or whatever. And I'd find myself making excuses about being tired or stressed from work. The intimacy started feeling forced, like I was going through the motions because that's what married people do. I'd tell him I wasn't feeling well or had a headache, and he'd be so understanding about it, which somehow made it worse. That's when I met Kevin through some mutual friends at this party. Dustin couldn't make it to because of work. The difference was immediately obvious. Kevin showed up in a car that cost more than most people make in a year, wearing a watch that probably cost more than our rent. But it wasn't just the money. It was how confident he was, how he could command a room just by walking into it. When he started talking to me, asking about my life and my dreams, I felt this electricity I hadn't experienced in months. He took me to lunch a few days later, just as friends, of course, at this place where they don't even put prices on the menu. I'm sitting there trying not to gawk at the crystal glasses and cloth napkins while he's ordering wine that costs more than Dustin and I usually spend on groceries in a week. Kevin starts telling me about his business ventures, the properties he owns, the vacations he takes to places I've only seen in magazines. He made me feel like I had been thinking too small my entire life. Those lunch dates turned into dinner dates, and dinner dates turned into shopping trips where Kevin would insist on buying me things that actually fit properly and didn't come from a clearance rack. He promised me the world, lavish vacations, a big house, security I'd never have to worry about again. When he'd pick me up in his car, I'd catch glimpses of myself in the tinted windows and think, this is what I was supposed to look like. This is the life I was meant to be living. The guilt was eating me alive, but every time I'd think about ending it with Kevin, he'd show me another piece of the life we could have together. Meanwhile, Dustin's at home making dinner reservations at Applebee's and thinking he's being romantic. How was I supposed to get excited about half-price appetizers when Kevin was showing me what real luxury felt like? I started pulling away more, claiming I was overwhelmed with work projects or needed space to figure myself out. Dustin would just nod and give me room, which was both a relief and somehow infuriating. The night I finally told him the truth. He was trying to initiate intimacy again, and I just couldn't fake it anymore. I started crying, and the words just came tumbling out. I can't keep lying to you, I said, and his whole face just changed. He didn't yell or throw things or call me names like I was expecting. He just sat there on the edge of the bed, looking like I had punched him in the stomach, waiting for me to explain. I told him about Kevin, about how he made me feel secure in ways I'd never experienced before. I explained that this wasn't about not loving Dustin. It was about finally understanding what I needed to be truly happy. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, just staring at his hands while I talked. When I finished, he looked up at me with these tired eyes and asked just one question. Do you want to be with him instead of Mia? I nodded through my tears because what else could I do at that point? The truth was finally out there and we both knew what it meant. He didn't try to fight for me or make promises about changing or beg me to reconsider. He just nodded back and said he'd call a lawyer in the morning. That was it. No dramatic speeches or throwing my stuff out on the lawn. Just this quiet acceptance that made me feel even worse somehow. The divorce was clean and quick since we didn't have kids or much property to split up. I moved out within 2 weeks and straight into Kevin's world of expensive restaurants and weekend trips to places with names I could barely pronounce. While Dustin was apparently eating ramen noodles and working overtime to afford the apartment rent alone, I was posting pictures of myself in designer clothes at resorts that looked like movie sets. For a year and a half, I felt completely vindicated in my choice. Kevin would surprise me with jewelry that sparkled under restaurant lighting. Take me to charity galas where I'd meet people who owned multiple homes. Show me off like I was this precious thing he'd discovered. I'd post carefully curated photos on social media, not to hurt Dustin specifically, but to show everyone that I had made the right choice. This was the life I deserved. The life I should have been living all along. Then everything fell apart in the span of about 3 weeks. Kevin got arrested on federal fraud charges. Apparently all those business ventures and properties were built on schemes that were finally catching up to him. The FBI seized his assets, froze his accounts, and suddenly the man who had promised me the world couldn't even make bail. He got sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, and just like that, everything disappeared. I went from living in luxury to crashing on friends' couches, from designer clothes to wondering how I was going to pay for groceries. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dustin, who I'd left for not being able to provide enough, was now stable and secure while I was scrambling to figure out my next move. That's when I started thinking maybe I had made a mistake. Maybe there was still a chance to fix things. I reached out to Dustin through messages, carefully crafted texts that acknowledged I had made some poor choices, but suggested we might be able to work things out. When he finally agreed to meet me for coffee, I spent hours getting ready, trying to look put together despite everything falling apart around me. I practiced what I was going to say, how I was going to explain that I had learned my lesson and was ready to appreciate what we had. He looked good when I saw him at the coffee shop, healthier somehow, more confident than I remembered. Meanwhile, I could see in his eyes that I looked tired, drained, broken down by everything that had happened. I launched into my prepared speech about how money is just paper, how I don't think I'll ever find someone who loved me the way he did, how I realized I had never learned how to truly love him back, but wanted the chance to try. He listened patiently, the same way he always had, but when I finished talking, he just shook his head. He said he hoped I healed from whatever had driven me to make the choices I made. But he had moved on, not just from me, but from the whole idea of marriage, of trusting someone with that kind of power to destroy his life. He had found peace in his independence, he said, and wasn't interested in risking that again. I sat there staring at him, realizing that for the first time in our entire relationship, Dustin was telling me no. The man who had given me extra cheese sauce without being asked, who had remembered to bring jackets to cold movie theaters, who had quietly accepted my betrayal without a fight, was finally setting a boundary I couldn't cross. He paid for both our coffees, wished me well, and walked away, leaving me sitting there with the crushing realization that some mistakes can't be undone. The worst part is how everyone acts like this is some kind of justice, like I got what I deserved for wanting more than a mediocre life. They don't understand that I didn't set out to hurt anyone. I just recognized an opportunity for something better and took it. How was I supposed to know Kevin's success was built on lies? How was I supposed to predict that choosing security over sentiment would backfire so completely? Now I'm stuck rebuilding from nothing while Dustin gets to be the sympathetic figure who was wronged by his ungrateful wife. People love that narrative. The idea that nice guys eventually win and ambitious women eventually get their comeuppance. But what they don't see is that I'm still the same person who knew she deserved better than Target shopping trips and Applebee's dates. The circumstances changed, but my standards didn't. I've had to accept that Dustin isn't coming back, that the bridge I burned can't be rebuilt no matter how much I might want to try. He's moved on to a life that doesn't include the possibility of being hurt like that again, and I'm left dealing with the consequences of choices that made perfect sense at the time. Maybe that's the real tragedy here, not that I lost him, but that I lost him for something that turned out to be an illusion. Everyone wants this to be a story about learning to appreciate what you have, but the truth is more complicated than that. I did appreciate Dustin, in my own way, but appreciation isn't the same as being satisfied. I saw a chance for something bigger, something that matched my ambitions, and I took it. The fact that it didn't work out doesn't mean I was wrong to want more. It just means I picked the wrong person to want it with. So now I'm starting over, older and supposedly wiser, trying to figure out what comes next. Dustin gets to be the hero of his own story, the man who survived betrayal and found peace in solitude. Kevin's paying for his crimes in a federal prison, probably telling himself he was just unlucky to get caught. And I'm the one left holding the pieces of a life that exploded because I dared to reach for something beyond what I was given. The thing that really gets me is how people act like this validates every small-minded belief they've ever had about staying in your lane and being grateful for whatever scraps life throws your way. They see my downfall as proof that ambition is dangerous, that wanting more than you have leads to disaster. But I refuse to accept that narrative. Refuse to pretend that settling for less is somehow noble or wise. I made choices based on the information I had at the time, choices that any rational person would have made in my position. The fact that those choices led to consequences I couldn't predict doesn't make me a villain. It makes me human. Dustin's moved on. Kevin's locked up. And I'm left to figure out how to rebuild. But I'm not going to apologize for refusing to settle for a life that felt too small for who I knew I could become.